Welcome to The Ballot. I'm Dave Morris. Today we're going to be talking about local races, and each week on this show we talk about either the national or the local political scene, and we're talking local today. I am joined and happy to be joined by Michael McNutt, Megan Rowland. Guys, thanks so much for your time this morning.
You bet.
Michael, we'll start with you. What are some of the key races that you are looking at on your beat?
Well, we talked last week about a couple of legislative races, and one that we want to talk about this week is House District 60. It's an interesting race. It's one of those redistricted races. It used to be out in western Oklahoma, out in Becca and Ellis counties, far western Oklahoma. And because of the population shift, every 10 years, of course, legislators have to redistrict and try to get the equal number of population in each district. And they did it with House District 60, where the incumbent was term limited, and they thought, and they did it with a couple other districts. So Representative Percy Walker, who's from Elk City, is term limited, can't run. It's been a Democratic seat for the past 50 years, heavily Democratic district. Now it's been moved further east, and now it's just west of Oklahoma City. It's in Canadian County, all the way in Caddo County. So it goes from El Reno all the way down to Carnegie. So it's a pretty large district.
Pretty big.
And it's a rural district as well as a suburban district. But the population now is mostly Republican. It's pretty close, about 1,000 more Republicans than Democrats. And the Republican candidate is Dan Fisher, who is a minister, is a popular minister out there, and has been involved in some social issues and the Tea Party. And he's running on the Republican ticket. And Fisher's opponent is a political newcomer, as Dan Fisher is too, Kendra Menz Kimball. And she's works in a veterinarian's office. It's her husband's a husband-wife operation down in Hinton. And so she's trying to get, trying to get the Republican, overcome that Republican majority, as well as get the fact that she's trying to get more of the rural area of the area. But of course, most of the population's in the suburban area. So that's going to be a pretty interesting race. We have two newcomers, but the edge may go to Fisher because what we're seeing statewide, the popularity of the Republican presidential candidate, and really more the unpopularity of a Democratic president, who 4 years ago didn't carry a single county. That probably will happen again. And so the Republicans generally have an edge. Any Republican on the ballot certainly has a boost from that. So it's a pretty hotly contested race. Fisher's raised a lot more money than Kimball has.
Which certainly helps as well.
Yeah, definitely. So that's going to be an interesting race to see how that turns out. And then it'll be another pickup for the Republicans in the House, which they already have a 2/3 majority.
Gotcha. All right, Megan, we'll turn over to you. What are some of the races you're following?
There's a pretty interesting race going on down in Lawton for District 31. It's a two-term incumbent, Don Barrington. He's a Republican, pretty popular down there. He's being challenged by Tony Terrell, who's a middle school teacher. And Tony's big issue is education. He wants to see more resources go to schools. He's concerned about the state of education in Oklahoma. And so that'll be an interesting race down there. He's a Democrat. He's got kind of an uphill battle, but facing an incumbent. But
a two-term incumbent and a Democrat, you're right. He certainly has his work cut out for him.
Absolutely. And then voters in Norman have got a good race. They've got Rob Standridge, a Republican, and Claudia Griffin, a Democrat, both trying to fill the seat of term-limited Senator Jonathan Nichols, who's very popular down there. So that's an interesting race to see who's going to win that. That district, District 15, also comes into southern Oklahoma County as well. So some more voters will have a say in who gets that seat. As always, the J. Paul Lane, Larry Boggs race down in District 7, kind of the McAllister area. That's a big race too. So that'll be interesting to see if that goes Democrat or Republican. And those are the big races in the Senate.
Yeah, I think what we're interested too is, a lot of people have been hearing about early voting.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. We're taping this here at the end of October, but you said early voting starts next week, and of course the general election is November 6th.
Right, because some people have been asking about it because they've heard some states that have been going on for 2 weeks, and President Obama's voting today in
you're
Chicago.
Right, and I saw something on TV. They were saying in some of these states, maybe it was Ohio, where they're going door to door. Hey, who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? And they're like, hey, if you do the early voting, they're going to leave you alone because they're only going after those who haven't voted. Right. So, not to interrupt you, but early voting.
Early voting. But that, as you say, a week from today in Oklahoma, early voting will start. And in Oklahoma, you have to go to the county election board office in your county. So go to the county seat usually in the courthouse. Some election boards have separate offices, and you cast your vote there during mostly general operating, normal business hours. So it starts next Friday, runs to Saturday, then goes to Monday, and then of course the election is Tuesday, November 6th. And just make sure you have your voter ID card, that you're issued by the county when you go vote, because we do have a new voter ID law that took effect last year. Don't need a photo, but you need to have some identification, like a driver's license will work, or some kind of photo identification with a picture on it. And if you don't have that, then your voter identification card, which are issued by the county election board, which has your precinct number and all that.
Gotcha.
And voters should be sure and check on the election board website as well where their precincts are, because like Michael said, a lot of redistricting occurred, and
So there might be some changes,
Yes.
and they show up the wrong place.
correct.
Or,
Some
And
voters
we saw that in this special, one of the primary runoff, where a voter was, looked at, has been a steady voter for 20 years, and was convinced she knew who her candidates were, goes to her polling place,
did a research,
saw
she
the
went to
ballot,
work.
and their name she doesn't recognize because it had been redistricted. So yeah, that's a good idea. Check. You can go to the state election board and just put in your precinct number in and tell you, give you a ballot, who's your state representative and legislator and all that.
All right, one last question for you guys. You were talking about campaign finance, and that's an issue or story you guys are working on.
Yeah, Megan's been looking into that.
Yeah, coming up next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend in the Oklahoman, we're going to break down for everyone who's spending the most money in this election.
That's an interesting story.
It is. It's going to be a good look to see where the money's going and who's going to have an influence in this election cycle. And then we're also going to break down for voters so they can see what each candidate has brought in, who their top donors are, who's going to have an influence on them when they get into office.
And so the deadline to file those campaign reports is next week. So that's why we're going to have it next weekend, because we're going to get the latest campaign data that's available from the State Ethics Commission. But it'd be a daunting task to look at some of these. But some of these legislative races, you're probably not going to see a whole lot. But in others, it's going to be interesting to see some of the races you wouldn't think would have a lot of money raised. You looked at one, what was that, in southern Oklahoma?
At the moment right now, the leading candidate for bringing in campaign funds is Susan Paddock in Ada, Oklahoma. She's an incumbent senator. She has raised more than $100,000. So not a whole bunch of money, but for this election cycle, it's a good amount of money.
What makes that interesting is that her opponent hasn't spent a lot of money and has spent some time in jail this year. So you wouldn't think she would need that much. But we should say that about $35,000 she transferred from her state education. When she ran for state school superintendent 2 years ago, she had $35,000 left. And in Oklahoma, you can transfer statewide raised campaign funds to another statewide fund. So she's got a lot of money, but about $35,000 came from her previous race.
And that might change. More donations are going to come in this week, so she might not be in the lead after Monday. We'll have to see.
Interesting stuff. All right, Michael, Megan, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate the time and the expertise. This has been The Ballot. Once again, it's a weekly look at some of the national and local elections as we'll get closer to November 6th in the general election. And next week, we will have more coverage from both the national and local side, including a Google Hangout on Wednesday as we'll go live to talk about the political scene here in Oklahoma and around the nation.